Welcome back. An attack blamed on the militant Boko Haram group has claimed 2 lives in Cameroon's extreme north. Reports suggest that the Islamist group has rare bases in Cameroon, but authorities in Yaoundé are not keen to allow Nigerian troops to cross their shared border in pursuit of militants. The Cameroonian government has meanwhile pleaded to cooperate with the neighboring countries to defeat insecurity. We have more in the CFI report.
Between Nigeria and Cameroon, police patrols have been stepped up, especially the Rapid Intervention Brigade, the elite unit of the Cameroonian army. The activity comes 4 days after the attack by Boko Haram radicals against the police station in Kuseri, in Cameroon's extreme north region. Largely featured in the local press, the terrorist attack resulted in 2 deaths, including a member of the security force. Local people were in shock. I feel like I've been attacked, and I'm angry, as if my country were threatened by a terrorist organization, and I'm especially critical of the laxism of the government. This was not the first time that Boko Haram carried out an attack in Cameroon. The Islamic radicals have used Cameroonian villages as reserve bases against the Nigerian army. This professor is writing a paper about the weakness of Cameroon against the rising strength of the Boko Haram group. He says the Cameroonian security and defense forces must develop a new strategy against the radical Islamic group. I think that the means of fighting must be adapted to the threat posed by Boko Haram. That way the fight can go forward and get more convincing results. For the moment, it's tough to deal with an enemy that is invisible. It's always there, but based nowhere. After denying it for a long time, Cameroonian officials are finally admitting that the country is suffering from the weak security situation in the northeast of Nigeria. For reasons of sovereignty, Cameroon refuses to give Nigerian troops the right to enter its territory when pursuing Boko Haram fighters. However, Yaoundé says it does want to cooperate with Abuja. I want to say that we are fully ready to cooperate in goodwill with all our neighboring countries to fight against cross-border crime. The Cameroonian territorial minister has stepped up visits to the extreme north region. His goal is to convince local traditional chiefs to tell security forces when Boko Haram members are in their villages.
France has announced a troop surge and a new strategy to combat militancy in Mali, following the death of a French soldier near Mali's Tanzania region. The South Africans went to polling stations on Thursday to elect new legislatures, which will in turn vote in a new president, although results were being tabulated when this report was being prepared. The ruling African National Congress was reported to have taken an early lead. For more on these stories and others, we go with this roundup of news.
A soldier has been killed in northern Mali. It is the 8th military casualty in Mali since Operation Serval was launched in January of last year. The soldier was killed during an attack last night in the region just south of Tessalit. Jihadist groups are still very active in northern Mali, posing a threat not only to the government but to neighboring countries. The French Minister of Defense announced a fresh deployment of troops in the area and a change of strategy. What is new is that they will be concentrated in Gao. 3,000 troops will also be deployed in what I call the Sahel-Sahara danger zone, where all types of trafficking occur. When asked how long the new operation would take, Mr. Le Drian said, as long as necessary. While many South Africans have expressed dissatisfaction with the ANC, the ruling party is set to win the general elections. Preliminary results from 50% of polling stations place the ANC in the lead with 62% of the votes. The party is almost certain to win by a comfortable margin, placing it at the head of government for another 5 years. Strengthening economic ties between China and Africa topped the agenda at the Abuja Economic Forum. The importance of the conference has been overshadowed by attacks by Boko Haram in recent weeks. China has promised to help Nigeria in the fight against terrorism. China's Premier, Li Keqiang, met with several African leaders to discuss potential projects. Valerie Amos, the UN Under-Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs, visited a camp in N'Djamena, Chad on Thursday as part of a visit which aims to raise relief aid. Chad is struggling to accommodate more than 100,000 refugees who fled the violence in the Central African Republic.
President Vladimir Putin has asked pro-Russian activists in eastern Ukraine to put plans to hold a referendum on autonomy on hold. But the pro-Russian camp seems to be having none of that. Organizers of the vote say the referendum will take place as planned. The Russian president's unexpected U-turn comes against the backdrop of ongoing military operations to dislodge separatists from government buildings in eastern Ukraine. We have more in this report.
The referendum on autonomy planned for the 11th of March. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin called for the vote to be postponed to allow dialogue and announced the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine's border. But Ukrainian separatists have decided to ignore the Russian leader's declarations.
There was a vote, and the decision not to postpone the referendum was passed 100%. I'm sure that if the referendum is not held on the 11th of May, we will not be able to hold it at all because we will have lost the confidence of the people.
In the east of Ukraine, troops are still fighting to regain control of official buildings and terrain, particularly in Slavyansk, the pro-Russia separatist stronghold. During a tour of inspection, Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk described the Russian leader Vladimir Putin's calls to delay the referendum as hot air.
I think the Russian president needs to be informed that no referendum was planned for the 11th of May. If terrorists and separatists supported by Russia got an order to postpone something that doesn't exist, it's their affair. If Russia stops financing and supporting them and withdraws troops, then the situation will stabilize.
In Warsaw, NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, meeting with Poland's Prime Minister, said there were no indications that Russia has withdrawn its troops from the Ukraine border a day after President Putin claimed to have done so.
We now take our second break. And in sport, the allure of stadium and the promise of multi-million-dollar contracts often leading young African players to run into the hands of traffickers masquerading as football agents. Thousands of vulnerable young African footballers are reportedly smuggled into Europe and other parts of the world by the so-called agents. This CFI report details some of the efforts of the Belgian Foundation working to stop the exploitation of young footballers in Europe.
Olympique Fusion are savoring their victory. They've just won a tournament organized by the Semilia Foundation, a Belgian organization that fights against the exploitation of young African football players abroad. Each year, nearly 15,000 young players are sent secretly to Europe, North Africa, and Asia.
The situation in Thailand is catastrophic for young Ivorian players whose contracts were broken either because they expired or because the Thai club that brought them over decided they didn't want them anymore. They cannot return to Cote d'Ivoire because tickets are too expensive, their visas have run out, and sometimes they end up in prison.
Most of these young players live and breathe football. Their dream is to follow in the footsteps of their idols, Didier Drogba, Samuel Eto'o, and Yaya Toure. But more often than not, the dream turns into a nightmare.